The desert stretched in all directions, like a sigh that had misplaced its punctuation. Every grain of sand shimmered faintly, as though it had once been wet and hadn't entirely given up on the idea. Percival Tumbleseed, part-time wanderer and full-time confusion enthusiast, stood at the edge of that golden infinity. His hat flapped weakly in the hot breeze, and his loyal companion, the umbrella, Esquerza, looked distinctly unenthused. "Are you quite sure," said the umbrella, "that this is a sensible environment for someone of my particular design?" "No," said Percival cheerfully. "That's what makes it exciting." They had arrived at dawn, when the air was still cool and the horizon shimmered with possibility. Now the sun was climbing, and every shadow seemed to hum faintly, like a forgotten melody. According to the map, drawn unhelpfully on a napkin that had since dissolved in tea, this was the sand sea of Somnia, where mirages came to retire and dunes whispered bedtime stories to the wind. Percival adjusted his satchel and began walking. The sand was warm, soft, and suspiciously chatty. "Step lightly," murmured the ground beneath him. "We're dreaming of rivers today." The umbrella blinked. Did the desert just speak? "Yes," said Percival, unfazed. "I believe we've arrived during a particularly imaginative heat wave." As they walked, the dunes rose and fell like gentle waves, and Percival began to notice shapes forming within them. Shimmering silhouettes of fish, coral, even what looked like a rather startled octopus. "Ah," said Percival, "the sand sea is trying to remember what it once was." "What, damp?" said the umbrella. "Precisely." A gust of wind swept across the landscape, bringing with it the faint scent of salt. For a moment, Percival thought he heard gulls. Then, ahead, a figure appeared, rising out of the sand as though sculpted by the thought of being seen. It was tall and glimmering, its body made of swirling dust and sunlight, eyes two pale blue reflections of vanished water. "Welcome, traveller," said the figure, voice like wind over dunes. "You walk upon the bones of an ocean." "How marvellous," said Percival. "Are you its ghost?" "I am its memory," said the being. "Once I was the tide. Now I am the mirage that remembers." Percival bowed politely. "I'm Percival Tumbleseed, professional wanderer and accidental hydrologist. This is my umbrella." The mirage inclined its shimmering head. "We've been expecting you." The umbrella gave a nervous twitch. "That's never good news." The mirage extended a hand of glinting grains. "The desert is forgetting how to be dry. The dreams of rain have returned, but without the water to hold them. Soon the sand sea will drown in mirages." Percival considered this. A drowning desert. "How poetic, poetic," agreed the mirage, "but inconvenient. You must help us remember balance. Teach the sand to thirst again." "Teach sand to be thirsty," repeated the umbrella flatly. "Excellent. I assume this will involve impossible errands and metaphysical metaphors." "Of course," said Percival. "Wouldn't be an adventure otherwise." The mirage pointed toward the horizon, where the dunes curved into shapes like giant sleeping serpents. "Seek the well that dreams backwards. It holds the memory of thirst." "And how will we recognize it?" asked the umbrella. "It flows upward," said the mirage, and faded into sunlight. They set off once more. The dunes shifted underfoot, whispering to each other in a language of sighs. Percival listened closely. Occasionally a phrase surfaced. "Remember waves, miss the moon, still salty." At midday the heat grew mischievous. The sky quivered, and shapes began to appear on the horizon. Palm trees, cities of glass, rivers that flowed with golden syrup. The umbrella muttered about hallucinations and sunstroke, but Percival smiled. They're only ideas that forgot they weren't real. One mirage in particular caught his eye, a small oasis shimmering just ahead. A single date tree leaned over a pool of perfect blue water. "Do you think it's real?" asked the umbrella. "There's only one way to find out," said Percival, stepping forward. He reached the edge of the pool and saw his reflection wavering beneath the surface. Then the reflection smiled. First. "Oh dear," said the umbrella. The reflection stepped out of the water. It looked exactly like Percival, but slightly wetter. "Hello, me," said Percival. "Hello, me," said the reflection. "You're late." "Am I?" "Yes. I've already drunk." Percival frowned. "Was it refreshing?" "Existentially," said the reflection. "The water remembers everything you haven't done yet." "That sounds exhausting." "It is. I'd recommend not drinking it. Duly noted." The reflection gave him a sympathetic nod, then dissolved into mist. The oasis rippled once and vanished. Percival sighed. "I think we've entered the poetic portion of dehydration." The umbrella flapped irritably. "We need shade." "Shade would be nice," said Percival, looking around. "Perhaps we should ask for some." He addressed the nearest dune politely. "Excuse me, could we borrow a shadow?" The dune shifted thoughtfully, then rose several feet and formed a delicate, tent-like arch. The shadow it cast was cool and pleasant, smelling faintly of forgotten rainfall. "Thank you kindly," said Percival, settling beneath it. The umbrella nodded in approval. "I must admit, you have a way with geological features." Percival leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened to the murmur of the sand. Beneath the surface, something was singing, a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to come from deep below the desert floor. He couldn't make out the words, but the melody felt old and patient. When he finally drifted into a light doze, he dreamed of a vast inverted well stretching down into the sky, drawing stars instead of water. He awoke at twilight. The dunes had shifted again, rearranging themselves into a gentle spiral. At the center, a faint glow pulsed, steady and calm. "The well that dreams backwards," said Percival softly. The umbrella sighed. "Of course it is." They walked down into the spiral. Each step made the sand tremble slightly, humming with memory. When they reached the bottom, they found a hollow of silver dust and moonlight. At its center, a pool shimmered, liquid night, flowing upward in slow defiance of gravity. Percival removed his hat. Magnificent. The pool's surface quivered, and a voice emerged, deep and resonant. "Who seeks the thirst that quenches itself?" "I do," said Percival, "or possibly I don't." "It's unclear. Clarify," said the well. "I wish to teach the desert how to be dry again." "Then you must learn what thirst truly is." The umbrella muttered. "This is going to involve feelings, isn't it?" The well ignored it. "Place your hand in the flow." Percival did. The sensation was strange, cool, yet burning with absence. He felt not satisfaction, but longing, the ache of every dry leaf, every cracked riverbed, every empty cup that had ever waited. It was unbearable and beautiful. He withdrew his hand. A single drop clung to his palm, glowing faintly. The well's voice softened. "You now carry the seed of thirst. Take it to the dune of echoes and let it fall. There the desert will remember how to want." "How far is the dune of echoes?" asked Percival. "Farther than you think," said the well, "but closer than you are." And with that, it sank back into stillness. Percival looked at the glowing drop, then at the vast horizon. "Farther than I think, but closer than I am," he mused. That's either nonsense or excellent cartography." "Both," said the umbrella. They set off beneath the rising moon, shadows stretching long across the whispering sands. The desert sang softly behind them, an old lullaby, half rain, half dust. The moon hung low over the desert, pale as a coin forgotten by time. Each dune gleamed silver, their shapes shifting almost imperceptibly, as though the world itself were breathing in its sleep. Percival Tumbleseed and the umbrella trudged on through the night, following the whisper of the wind, or perhaps the whisper of something else, pretending to be wind. The seed of thirst pulsed faintly in Percival's pocket, glowing like a heartbeat made of longing. "Farther than I think, but closer than I am," he muttered, staring at the horizon. "That's a riddle if ever there was one." The umbrella sniffed, or simply terrible directions. They crested a dune and stopped. Below them, spread across the desert floor like spilled ink, was a vast procession of lights. Torches flickered, lanterns swayed, and music drifted faintly on the wind, an entire caravan moving slowly but steadily through the night. "Ah," said Percival, "company." "I distrust company that glows," said the umbrella. "It usually leads to plot complications." But Percival was already descending. The caravan was unlike anything he'd seen. The wagons floated a few inches above the sand, held aloft by whispers of hot air and possibly wishful thinking. Camels made of woven starlight plodded along gracefully, their hooves leaving no prints. Musicians rode atop the wagons, playing instruments that made no sound, yet filled the air with melodies one could remember hearing later. A sign swayed from the lead wagon, painted in curling gold letters, "The Caravan of Unfinished Journeys. We go nowhere eventually." As Percival approached, a woman with eyes like twilight waves stepped down to greet him. Her robes shimmered with maps of constellations that changed as she moved. "Welcome, wanderer," she said with a small bow. "You've caught us mid-destination." Percival bowed back. "A pleasure. I'm Percival Tumbleseed, wanderer and occasional rediscoverer of logic. This is my umbrella. Pleasure, I'm sure," said the umbrella, trying to look less like a tourist. "I am Captain Selime," said the woman, "guide of the unfinished. We travel between destinations that forgot how to arrive." "That sounds delightfully unproductive," said Percival. "Efficiency ruins wonder," Selime agreed. "Tell me, what brings you across our sand?" "I'm seeking the Dune of Echoes," said Percival, "to return thirst to the desert." Her eyebrows arched just slightly. "Ah, you carry the seed?" Then he blinked. "You know about it." "Of course. The desert dreams loudly these days. Its thoughts spill into our roots. Every night we pass through a different version of its imagination. And which one is this?" She smiled. "The one that believes it's an ocean." As if to prove her point, a wave of sand rolled across the horizon, breaking soundlessly. From somewhere deep below came the echo of a whale's song, distorted by heat and distance. "Magnificent," breathed Percival. "Do you mind if we join your caravan until we find our bearings?" "By all means," said Selime, "but be warned, no journey here ever ends where it intends." "That's all right," said Percival. "I rarely do either." They walked with the caravan as the moon climbed higher. Percival found himself beside a merchant wagon, piled high with objects that seemed only half real. Transparent compasses, hourglasses filled with shadows, and jars labeled "Collected Echoes," mildly used. The merchant himself was a round man with a cheerful expression and a beard that glittered faintly, as though dusted with starlight. Even in Traveller, he said. Care to buy something you didn't know you needed? Percival examined a jar curiously. What's this one? Ah, that's a fragment of silence, excellent for awkward pauses or dramatic revelations. Tempting, said Percival, but I'm travelling light. Suit yourself, though I'd recommend this. He held up a small silver coin. It always lands on the side you least expect. Percival grinned. How much? 3 questions and a sigh. Percival considered, then sighed dramatically and asked, What are you? Where are we? And why does the desert talk? The merchant beamed. Paid in full. He handed over the coin, which immediately began humming faintly in Percival's palm. The umbrella squinted at it. It's vibrating. Of course it is, said Percival. It's probably thinking. As dawn began to tint the world pink and gold, the caravan halted. They had reached a vast expanse of rippling dunes shaped like sleeping giants. The air here shimmered with a strange stillness. Captain Selimé approached. This is as far as we go. Percival frowned. The Dune of Echoes? Not yet, she said softly. But listen. He did. The desert was whispering, softly at first, then clearer, like distant voices carried on the wind. Words overlapped and tangled, familiar and foreign all at once. He realized with a start that they were his own words. Every sentence he'd ever spoken aloud, to forests, to rivers, to rains, murmured back to him, echoed and distorted by the sand. It's remembering me, he said in awe. The Dune of Echoes remembers everyone, said Selimé, but it doesn't tell the same story twice. Before he could respond, the horizon quivered. A new sound joined the whispering, a deep, rhythmic tremor. The dunes began to shift, sliding and folding like waves in reverse. The desert's dreaming again, murmured Selimé. You'd better move quickly. Percival nodded. Thank you. She gave a half smile. You'll find the dune when you stop searching for it. He sighed. That's getting to be a theme. With that, he and the umbrella set off once more into the trembling dawn, the caravan's music fading behind them like a lullaby for the lost. By midday, the desert was alive with sound. The whispering had grown louder, overlapping like the chatter of 1,000 invisible storytellers. Percival trudged on, half dizzy from the heat and half from the realization that every voice he heard belonged to some version of himself, versions that had made different choices, gone down other paths, or perhaps simply thought more interesting thoughts. Do you ever wonder, said one whisper, what might have happened if you'd stayed home? Never, said another, immediately contradicting it. The umbrella groaned. This is like being trapped in an argument between your past and future selves. Percival smiled faintly. At least I'm in good company. The sand grew finer as they climbed, shimmering like powdered sunlight. The higher they went, the quieter it became, until at last only a single voice remained, low, resonant, and unmistakably his own. Welcome, it said. I've been waiting. Percival stopped. Before him rose a massive dune, taller than a cathedral, its surface rippling like water, though no wind stirred it. The Dune of Echoes. Come closer, said his own voice, echoing from within. I'd like to remember you properly. He stepped forward. The sand shifted beneath his boots, drawing him inward. Why do you speak in my voice? He asked. Because I am what you leave behind, said the dune. Every word, every footprint, every sigh. You've wandered through forests and rains, but you never listen to your own echo. Percival thought about this. And what do my echoes say? That you are still searching for something you can't name, The umbrella gave a small, sympathetic rustle. That sounds accurate. The dune continued. You carry the seed of thirst. Do you even know what thirst means? Longing, said Percival. Desire for what's missing. The dune rumbled softly, amused, close. But thirst isn't about what's missing. It's about what's possible. It's the ache that reminds you you're still alive. Percival's hand went to his pocket. The glowing drop pulsed faintly. Then I suppose it's time to let the desert feel alive again. Not yet, said the dune. You must listen first. Listen to what? To everything that isn't you. The world fell silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy enough to have shape. Then, beneath that silence, he heard it. The smallest sound imaginable. Not wind, not sand, but breathing. The desert was alive. Not metaphorically, truly alive. Every grain exhaled heat and inhaled light. The dunes rose and fell with a rhythm older than tides. It wasn't empty after all. It was simply resting. He whispered, I hear you. And the desert whispered back, then remember us kindly. The air shimmered. The seed of thirst grew warm in his palm. He knelt, pressing the glowing drop into the sand. For a heartbeat. Nothing happened. Then, with a sound like the world exhaling, the dune bloomed. Water didn't gush or rush. It glimmered, rising through the sand in slow, spiraling ribbons of light. Each droplet hung suspended, half vapor, half memory. It didn't soak the ground, but shimmered through it, as though the desert were learning to dream of water instead of becoming it. The dune spoke one last time. You've done it. You've reminded us that thirst is not emptiness. It's promise, Percival smiled softly. I'm glad. Go now, said the dune. The desert remembers. The light faded. The dunes stilled. When Percival stood, the seed of thirst was gone, replaced by a faint, cooling ache in his chest, the gentle yearning of someone who's finally understood the beauty of wanting. The umbrella sniffed. Well, that was rather emotional. Percival looked up. Clouds were gathering overhead, thin, luminous wisps that almost looked like thought. I think it might rain, he said. In a desert? Scoffed the umbrella. Impossible. Possibly, said Percival. But then again, so am I. And with that, they walked on toward the horizon, where the first drop of rain in 1,000 years fell upward. The rain did not fall. It rose. It lifted gently from the dunes, droplets of memory, sighs of forgotten storms, and drifted skyward, glittering like beads of light. Each one carried a whisper, a secret, or perhaps a grain of laughter. The desert, it seemed, was undoing itself, not dying but rewriting. Percival Tumbleseed watched in awe as the landscape shimmered. The dunes rolled like ocean waves, slow and dignified, while pillars of light spun lazily where cacti had been. The umbrella opened itself halfway for dramatic effect. I believe, it said primly, that we have broken meteorology. Percival chuckled. Or taught it something new. They stood at the edge of a vast plain where sand and sky mingled without border. The air itself seemed indecisive, half shimmering heat, half cool mist. The seed of thirst had left a faint silver mark on his palm, pulsing softly in rhythm with the heartbeat of the world. He turned in a slow circle. Strange, isn't it? I thought the end of the desert would look like an edge, but it looks like a beginning. That's because you're facing the wrong way, said a new voice. They spun around. Behind them stood a man in robes made entirely of mirrors, each reflecting a different sky. His face was calm and kind, though it seemed to shift between ages, now young, now ancient, now both at once. Good morning, said Percival. Or evening. It's hard to tell neither, said the Mirror Man. You've entered the between horizon. Here, time has manners. It waits until you're ready. How thoughtful, said the Umbrella. And you are? I am Mirroth, keeper of reflections that wander too far. You, Mr. Tumbleseed, have wandered farther than most, Percival bowed slightly. It's something of a hobby. Mirroth's mirrored robes shimmered, catching fragments of the rising rain. The desert thanks you. You gave it back its thirst, its reason to dream. But now you must decide whether to return to your world or continue beyond the horizon that forgot to end. Percival blinked. That's an option? It always is, said Mirroth. Most never realize it. He gestured toward the horizon. It pulsed faintly, as though breathing. A thin, glowing line that refused to stay still. Every so often it rippled like a curtain, revealing flashes of color and shape, glimpses of other landscapes, other stories. Percival frowned. What lies beyond it? Possibility, said Mirroth, the place where stories go when they refuse to end neatly. The Umbrella made a suspicious sound. Sounds dangerously unedited. Percival smiled. Exactly my kind of place. They walked together across the changing sands. The desert hummed quietly beneath them, a song of gratitude too vast for words. Sometimes the dunes turned to glass, other times to feathers that melted into the air. It was not a place bound by reason, and Percival found that comforting. Tell me, Mirroth, he said after a time, what happens to those who cross the horizon? They remember differently, said Mirroth. They become stories told by the wind, or dreams that never wake. Some return as echoes, some stay as constellations. And you? I listen, said the Mirror Man simply, until listening becomes part of the silence. Percival nodded. Then I think I'd like to listen too. But as he spoke, the horizon flickered. From its depths came a low murmur, like laughter carried from another world. Then came shapes, fleeting at first, then clearer, the silhouettes of trees. A forest, impossibly green, rippling behind the glowing line. He felt something stir within him, a tug, gentle but insistent. The forest he'd once wandered was calling again. Mirroth saw his hesitation. You're being remembered. Percival blinked. Remembered? Yes, said Mirroth. Every story that ends leaves an echo. Yours seems to have found a new beginning. The Umbrella sighed dramatically. Of course it has. He's going to wander again. Probably somewhere damp. The horizon pulsed brighter, like a heartbeat seen through fog. The forest within shimmered, its branches curling like fingers in invitation. Percival turned to Mirroth. If I cross back, will I remember this place? Not as it was, said Mirroth, but as it meant. And if I stay, then you'll forget the need to ask. He thought for a long moment. The desert's wind ruffled his hair like an affectionate sigh. He looked at the Umbrella, which was pretending not to look back. I think, said Percival softly, that I've learned enough from silence. It's time to listen to the noise again. Mirroth smiled faintly. Then walk forward until the world remembers your footsteps. Percival took a deep breath and stepped toward the horizon. The air thickened, not like water, but like story. Each step felt heavier, fuller. He could hear faint laughter, the rustle of leaves, the hum of rain. Then the horizon reached out, a bright, thin line, and gently wrapped itself around him like a page closing. When he was gone, Mirroth knelt and pressed his mirrored palm into the sand. The dunes shimmered, rearranging themselves into shapes that only silence could read. Across the endless expanse, the desert whispered to itself. He remembered us kindly, and somewhere, high above, the rain began to fall again, this time downward. When Percival opened his eyes, he was standing in a forest. But not the forest he remembered. This one was stitched together from all the places he'd been. Trees with bark like sunlit dunes, leaves that shimmered with reflections, air that smelled faintly of rain that rose instead of fell. "Ah," said Percival softly, "it seems the desert followed me home." The umbrella shook off a few grains of glowing sand. It always does. They walked through the forest together, and as they did, the trees began to hum. A low, familiar tune, the same rhythm he'd heard in the desert's breathing. "It's all connected," he murmured. "Of course it is," said the umbrella. "Everything in your stories eventually meets for tea." At a small clearing, they found a pond, perfectly still, perfectly round. The surface reflected not the sky above, but the desert he'd left behind. Dunes shimmering under starlight, mirages chasing their own tails, and a man made of mirrors bowing toward the horizon. Percival smiled and whispered, "Thank you." The reflection rippled, and for just a heartbeat, the desert seemed to smile back. He set down the umbrella and sat by the pond. The world was very quiet now, not empty, just waiting, the kind of waiting that felt full of potential. "Well," he said at last, "perhaps I'll rest here a while." The umbrella leaned beside him. "Until what?" "Until the next story wanders by," said Percival, eyes twinkling. And if one listened closely, past the rustle of leaves and the sigh of the pond, one could almost hear the distant sound of the desert breathing, content in its thirst. Weeks later, or perhaps centuries, time had gone pleasantly vague, a traveler crossed the desert. He found, half buried in the sand, a single folded scrap of paper. The ink shimmered faintly in the heat. It read, "If you find yourself lost between where you were and where you're meant to be, remember, thirst is not a curse. It's a promise waiting to be kept. With warmth, Percival Tumbleseed." The traveler smiled, tucked the note into his pocket, and kept walking. And somewhere, far beyond the dunes, the horizon gave a quiet, knowing laugh.